how we can really use design principles to discover problems and elegantly solve them, really thinking about the users in those situations and the use cases that we need to try to solve.
And prompt going to send the microphone along since it's being webcast.
Yeah.
If you've watched 20 minutes of us just chatting, then you are dedicated to this issue. All right. Yes.
So I'm actually from the same company as Brooks, and I echo a lot of what he said. So yeah, really finding out how we can engage users, help them be more connected with 911 and public safety, in a non-freaky privacy way, but they can, provide information so that they can be safer if there was an emergency, basically. So interesting how to engage people in design principles and so forth, just to really help them feel like they can contribute, but not in a scary way, I guess.
Bill Bushy. I'm one of the lead organizers and co-founders of Open Twin Cities. I'm also the technology coordinator at eDemocracy. So for Open Twin Cities and eDemocracy, we're looking at the technology as it's a very important part of our lives in community and society, and so essentially making that technology more useful for citizens, for residents who are using it. It's a way to actually create a better society. And so Laura and I have actually been talking a lot of how, as service design is essentially good software development practice, how it is also good public policy, or how it is good, it's a good melding of public discussion and software development. And so I'm just really interested in that discussion.
I'm Kristen Murray, and I'm a program developer at the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs, or CURA, at the University of Minnesota. And CURA is working this year on a civic technology project in partnership with Open Twin Cities to support diverse collaborations to develop civic technologies, especially that improve and increase people's access to jobs, transportation, housing, education, health resources, and kind of better, more transparent engagement with decision makers and public processes. And so that's really broad. And when we started this project, we went to our kind of critical friends, community-based organizations, community leaders that we've been working with for years or decades. And one thing that we heard from them is that it was really important, and most of these people, I would say, are not technology developers or technologists, but they're working on issues, they're working with communities. And one thing we heard from them is that it was really important to have the issue or the problem or the people up in front, not the technology, lead the project. And so we decided to try to use a design-based approach through this grant program. We did a human-centered design workshop a couple weeks ago as kind of a big piece of technical assistance in advance of the application, the grant application, and are trying to infuse kind of, what is the need of the user, how are you involving the user in the testing through the application and the process of this project. So I'm really interested in, how needs drive a project, and then how sort of technical and non-technical people and collaborate to both to bring in users and then to really build robust projects.
Alina Kolstad. I work for a local nonprofit, and I'm just generally interested in engaging people, better.
Which nonprofit?
Women Against Military Madness.
My name is Ross Crandall. I'm the co-founder of Perlu, and we're basically developing what I like to call a digital town square. And the goal is to kind of actually train people how to become neighbors once again, as well as allow people the ability to explore their community better. I think there's a lot of things that happen around us that we don't even know about half the times until we either hear it because we heard band playing in the distance, or heard it from a friend who went before. But so from a design standpoint, I think that having data out there is great to have it available, but if it's in a way that can't be consumed, what good does it do? So looking at those design aspects and how to give the data out there in a place that's easily fed and digested by people, I think is kind of the key.
Jonathan Walls. I'm a software developer at the Institute on Community Integration at the U of M. Institute on Community Integration. So that's working with disabled people and doing research and providing resources to help people integrate with the community and be active members of their own community. And so as part of that, that would be just interesting. And I'm a relatively new software developer there. I've only been there about 6 months. So I'd just like to get kind of a perspective on what other people are doing in that realm of technology.
I'm Dave Harrison. I'm just working on a physics doctorate, so nothing to do with technology, but I'm interested in hearing the ways that technology can be used to make our community a better place.
My name is Stephen Kelley. I work in higher education here in the state of Minnesota. I'm actually on a major grant project right now that focuses on orthotics and prosthetics, so maybe we'll have something interesting to talk about later on. But I'm in this session primarily because of my colleague next to me here. We have a private venture that we're working on right now, and he found this topic to be particularly interesting, so I'm going to let him talk more about how he thinks that's interesting.
Well, I don't know that my interest in being here has a lot to do with a private undertaking or not. I'm also involved in higher education. My name is Mitat Konar. I am a design champion in technology, and one of the things that when you're trying to champion design, one of the things you run into is the mindset that somehow design has a business benefit, and that ends up kind of being the light that the moth is intended to gravitate toward. And, in addition to, of course, I want to see design become something that has a higher profile in all aspects of endeavor. And so I was attracted to this because it definitely works against the idea that design is something that's intended to produce more sellable product, and that design is just simply something that produces better.
So you guys work for higher education, like public education, or?
Century College.
Oh, Century College, okay.
Minnesota State University.
Okay. So I'll just pretend to aim this at people when we chat. Not sure whether it'll pick up or not, but so I'm Steve Clift. I'm the founder and executive director of eDemocracy. What interested me about this session is that Facebook is sort of designed to feed you ice cream, right? It's your friends and family. Typically, it is a filter that sort of tries to show you what's most important or most interesting to you. You tend to overlike things, and it tries to protect you from the fact that you like too many things by giving you what you really like, right? And so our approach is sort of like, well, actually, rather than being about friends and family, it's more about communities and publicness, and in exposing you to the serendipity of things that you wouldn't normally click on, but are geographically relevant to you. So similar to Ross, we're very interested in neighbor connecting online, and we have strong interest in how helping people find their lost cat can also then lead to a conversation about a shade study for a new development along the light rail that actually engages the elected official and some planning officials, and to have sort of that ecology of very local connecting that actually gives you what's good for you in a citizen sense. So one of the challenges with that is that we have then preconceived notions that like participation is a good thing and that raising your voice is important, and these are things that you learn this in civics class, right? But is that what really people really want, right? And how do we actually better design our services, our engagement online, so that it actually reaches people in a way that they can help drive it. And so that's one of my big interests. And particularly, we're about to launch this week our new design, and we can't compete on features. We're trying to be simple, right? And it's basically mailing list / web spaces for your block, or not for your block, but for your neighborhood, and the citywide online town hall. And our question is like, so now as we launch this new design, how do we actually gather input on what features with our scarce resources should we invest in to add on top of that layer, right? And so how do we get better input about what people really want, And so we have this window here for the next, sort of 6 months where there's probably 2 or 3 features that we can add now that our design is launched that we want to take further, and so that's what we need to get more intelligent about. So we had a lot of different questions and comments come out, and I just sort of decided to summarize it into, let's go around the room and answer what worked and what didn't. So if you've done some design work, service design work in your work to try to improve what you've done, or you didn't do it and you had a major failure and you've learned some lessons, let's just sort of talk about one thing that worked in our past in this kind of space, and then one thing that didn't work and a lesson from that, because we probably can learn a lot more from our mistakes at this point than our successes with service design as it relates to civic tech. Does that sound like a good big question? All right, go ahead. No. No. But I want to ask you that, Kristen. So you folks have designed a process that is attempting to bring in extremely diverse voices, lower income voices, people of color in the Twin Cities to help basically define tech that is built or apps that are built. So, why? What was the big failure in this movement, or that you've seen in the Twin Cities that sort of makes you say that this is actually something that isn't needed? How's that for a leading question? But it is needed. It is needed. Because so you're doing something different than others have done pretty much anywhere in the country. In terms of civic tech with inclusion. So what didn't work, and why do you have to do what you're trying to do?
So yeah, I think so. I've had a foot in the technology world for my whole career. Really, I studied electrical engineering in undergrad. I worked at the Science Museum in informal science education with a focus on engaging girls and youth of color and low-income youth in STEM fields and STEM pathways. And now I'm doing this civic technology work and also work in design and technology in other spaces too. And what I noticed and what I heard from people in the civic tech world and what I've seen for my career is, mostly in technology spaces, it's a pretty homogeneous group of people that are coming. And in the civic tech, I think there's a few branches of the civic tech world, or the way that civic tech is created. It's certainly created in government. It's certainly created by nonprofits and private organizations, but I think that there's also this kind of citizen-driven or resident-driven movement of creating civic tech too, and a lot of times that's through events like hackathons or other kind of technology-focused events, and those tend to be pretty homogeneously attended in terms of who comes. Sometimes that's where the problems are defined too, or the needs are defined, or the solutions or the approaches or the agenda is defined. And so, with this civic tech project that we're working on, felt like it was important to slow that down and to, rather than jump right into a space where the focus is on using computers to solve the problem and just getting really technical right away, start with needs and users, or people, and needs, and maybe it's not. Maybe it's not necessarily people, individual people, but it's people who work with communities, who are leaders in communities, who advocate, who are maybe their work is very much about empathy building, because that's what they do, and then bring those people together with technologists, but not in a technology space. So in a low tech, rapid prototyping space.
That's great.
Just to see what happens.
Yeah.
So that's a very long answer.
That's great. Who's inspired to talk next? Anyone want to jump up before I point at you? Okay, Bill.
I actually have.
Yeah.
So I think as an example of, we didn't do service design and it failed. So we're just, Open Twin Cities is about to shut down our Adopt a Hydrant for the Twin Cities. And it's been an incredible learning process, because it's made us realize we essentially committed almost every sin that Kristen just described. Which is, as a small group, we thought, well, we assume this problem must exist in Minnesota, which is that fire hydrants always get buried. And well, hey, we have technology, and we'll just put the technology out. And then it never got used. Not really. I mean, I think maybe 3 or 4 dozen hydrants got adopted in both Minneapolis and St. Paul. It had maybe 1,000 visitors over 2
What was the
winters.
goal? So if you're I adopt a hydrant, what happens?
The idea is, if you adopt a hydrant, you would one, it would be your way of publicly showing that you're adopting this hydrant, you're going to clear it.
Of snow, it is.
Yeah,
So
when
it's
it's
basically,
snow.
yeah, you want to clear it so the fire crews can get to it.
Yeah. But I think that is the crux of why it failed, is the goal, I think, was actually much more self-serving for Open Twin Cities, which is essentially, we wanted to put up a tangible example of what Civic Tech needs. And this was pretty quick to put up.
You stood up code from another community, so it was you just got to basically import the location data. It wasn't you had to build it from scratch.
Yeah, it was an open source project out of Boston, and we just rebranded it basically. And so for that more organizational goal, it worked because it started a conversation in the cities, et cetera. But if our rhetoric is, well, we want to provide this tool so the community can, essentially make sure that this critical infrastructure is clear and available when it's needed. Well, we didn't do anything in terms of actually talking to the neighborhood, like, is this a problem? Or if so, in what capacity? We never really talked to the cities. Does the fire department run into this problem? And if so, what do you think should happen? And then critically, we also never really talked to them about, okay, we put this thing up. This seems like a really natural partnership that we could like help each other. We never established that partnership. So yeah, I think it's a good example of we went tech first and it failed entirely because of it.
All right, who's next? Who would like to tell a story?
One of the things that, like, I've done to kind of like find if there's proof of like, is this something that's needed, right? Is I just talked to, I went out and talked to people that live around me, right? It's like, how do you find neighbors? Well, you have them. And I just kind of asked, like, how do you keep in contact? And everybody has this piece of paper that nobody knows where it is, but they filled out their information on, right? But we don't know how old it is. So let's start a new one, right? So like there's a backyard barbecue that gets formed, and how things happen is that you get invited because somebody actually puts a poster on your door, right? And so it's kind of sporadic. So not everybody's invited, but just people. And I got invited because just happened to just moved into the neighborhood, right? And my mother, bless her heart, decided to walk around and like introduce herself and say, "My son just moved in." So that's cool.
Keep an eye on him.
Thanks, Mom. But like, to me, it's something. So every time we're at these events, it's like people like haven't connected in a long time. Especially the winters are getting longer. It feels like nobody goes outside. I don't live in a very community-focused neighborhood. It's Hoodbury, so like we drive into our garages and the doors shut, and we go out to our decks, like in the summertime. But in the winter, it's you're shut off, and so.
So you live in Woodbury, but your company's in Red Wing?
Well,
is it okay?
Yeah,
okay.
Because we're part of the Red Wing Ignite.
Oh, I see. Okay, great.
So we have now an office there. So we get that gig a bit all the time.
Yep.
But so it's kind of like forming those connections, and we've even, more so than technology, but we've even kind of constructed our way out of connecting as a community, right? When we decided to build houses without the front porch. Now everything shifts to the back. It's all very private and secluded. It's coming back now because I see that they're developing new homes with front porches, and I think too, like, everybody's kind of becoming more locally conscious. And so you were asking me earlier about like the Facebook thing, right?
Yeah.
Well, where like, I think people are kind of wanting to get away from that global reach and lost this novelty of being able to connect across the world. And I can't even connect with somebody who lives 100 feet away from me, and so I think that people are going to be shifting, and we see this trend happening from these grandiose, everything goes social networks into how can I bring it down to just what's important to me. So like there's 30 people, like I have amassed a collection of friends of like 600, but I talk to 10, right? So what is that getting? It's like the quality versus quantity.
Say, speaking of barbecues and signing up on a sheet of paper, so we passed this around on the previous session on Civic Tech and Open Data. If you want to join the Open Twin Cities Google group, what we found is that get your email address and we'll just stick you on. Or if you just want a newsletter only, just put news only next to your name. But if you haven't signed up for this already, I'm just going to pass it around. Because what we found is it's sort of like, if you have an opportunity to connect, take advantage of it. And a lot of times, like what we found is, from our experience, is that one of the worst things you can do is give out flyers to say, now go online to this website and sign up to be part of, connect with your neighbors online via e-democracy. We found that you could pass out 1,000 flyers and you'll get 5 people. But I can ask 1,000 people and I'll get 100 to say yes. And this is one of those things where, through trial and error, we just learned that, breaking through that way, and particularly around inclusion. So for us, it was, how do we go to events where our target demographic is that it's often less included. So basically, the folks that can connect most easily with neighborhoods are homeowners, and particularly the creative class, if you will, folks that are just sort of, outgoing and exuberant and sort of those folks. But what about folks over 65, or what about particularly in immigrant families, the children that are most comfortable with English, like often the young 20s that are often living at home. How do you get them tuned in? So who's next? Do you guys want to talk a little bit about your stuff?
Yeah.
Since you're sitting next to me, you can hold that.
Sure, sounds good. And I'll try to keep this relatively brief because I'm sure Carl has things he can add too. But this was kind of what I'm about to comment on is something that draws off of experience that I've had at Geocom, as well as a job that I had prior to coming to Geocom in a very similar position at a very similar company. Okay, so we produced mapping software that 911 dispatchers would use primarily to map the location of 911 calls when they came in. But one of the things that the software also did was it enabled dispatchers or emergency managers or administrators to rough out a geographic area of the map, record a message, and distribute that message out to all of the people in the affected area, sending a mass notification. Okay, that works great for landline telephones because we know where those are. We know where the addresses are, and we know what the phone numbers are that are associated with the addresses. Pretty easy to draw a shape around those points and say what points fall within it, get the phone numbers, and send out the message. That doesn't work so well for mobile phones, okay? We have no way to tell where someone is. We have no way to tell what address they're located at. So when you stand up an emergency notification system, we have no way of knowing which mobile phone numbers to call, okay? And we see a tremendous shift, of course, away from landline phones to mobile phones. If you look even just in a 911 dispatch center, some of them, 75, 80% of their calls are just made from wireless devices, right? Or voice over IP these days. So you enter into an interesting problem. How do you notify people when there's a chemical spill or a tornado or something like that? If we can only notify a dwindling set of landline telephones, how do you reach the community to see if they want to be notified? If they want to be notified, give us your number, right? We'll make sure we address the privacy concerns, make sure, of course, that it's only used for emergencies. But how do we reach out to the community to do that? We have some solutions at Geocom that do that, but I think we could do a much better job. And really this gets down to that community level of being able to go to all of these different groups, right? The elderly who might not be easy to access, or lower income communities who, if you distribute that on a website or in a news broadcast and you say, go to the website to sign up. Well, someone in a lower income community has to hop on the bus and go to the library to do that. That's not particularly easy. Can we make an easier on-ramp for those people to get with us, submit their information, so if there is a disaster, we can alert everybody, not just the people who are fortunate enough to go to a website and plug in their mobile phone number.
I want your card. Yeah, Seattle, there's a connection here. So Seattle is a city that does real-time 911 calls on a map. And I often cite it as an example of, if a government was going to be more open about crime data, often if they get there, it's more about the crime that happened 2 weeks ago. And, obviously a lot of 911 calls are never never result in anything like a police report. They just, no one was there, but you get this sense of heat, if you will, in Seattle that I've not seen in any other city. So do you have any of your cities that have decided to provide some public access to 911 maps? Just curious.
So you might be able to speak more to some of our statistics stuff. I've heard the desire for that, absolutely. But you may have a little more history with some of our larger deployments.
I'm not sure of anybody that's really like said, I want to get that out there.
Right.
Not that it might not be brewing, but
This may be an issue like, oh, it's neat. This is a good example. So Seattle, isn't that cool? Why can't we do that too? And that actually might be part of the problem, right? So I look at things and say, well, if that city done it, then why shouldn't we? Now, it might be that the city does that and it's not all that valuable, and to have Minneapolis or St. Paul do it would be a waste of resources. I don't know. And this is one of those challenges,
Right.
with Civic. But it's interesting. I just wanted to bring it up. But yeah.
It is really interesting because, we can develop these things in a vacuum and we could say, wow, it would be really cool if people could get a view into 911 call statistics or crime statistics, right? But I don't know why they want that. If they're just curious or if there's a specific need there. And that's what really drew me to this forum, was to say, maybe there's a better way that we can take a stab at assessing that need, getting in front of these people to determine that.
Well, like real estate, I can just imagine, if you're looking to buy a house and it's like determining your area based on real time, right? So like you can go to like Zillow, right? And they'll give you like crime statistics. You don't know how old that information is, right? And that's the problem, right? Is that you never really know how old information is that lives out on the interwebs. Right? It's like you can search for a document that's coming up from like 10 years ago, and it's like, well, it's probably not relevant. What they really need to build is like an internet vacuum cleaner, right? That can.
What time is it? Is the session over at 11:30?
I think it's technically over at 11:30.
So I'm put the higher ed guys back.
Next one's at 11.
Well, it's a whole, okay. So higher ed guys.
It was 11:40?
The next session starts.
You have a captured audience. You have students. They're pretty much all online, right? And there's, you're well webified, if you will. So do you have any stories of where you've engaged students in service design that sort of has resulted in some significant positive changes? Anything come to mind in your own experiences?
No. No, there are, but I mean, since time is short, I think a more productive thing would be to sort of mention something that echoes some of the things that are going on here. I have tried various ways of making myself available online. And what I have found is that students just don't seem to be that interested. You would think that, having an effective 24/7 access, or, reasonable 24/7 access to your course instructor would be something that everybody would like, they wow, great, it's like I'm in the shower and I don't know how to solve that particular thing. It's like, no, it's like that the amount of uptake I see on the the various channels that I open up, very surprisingly small.
So a lot of it is they want to know your office hours, and then they come to you in person, or what?
I'll catch you right after class.
Yeah. So you teach course. What's your course then?
I teach in computer science.
Okay.
I can comment on something if you want. So one thing that is, and this is on record, so I could find myself in big trouble for this, but I'll say it anyway. There's still a tremendous amount of higher education that's focused on, if we have a problem and throw tech at it, somehow it'll just solve itself. Like that that is still just everywhere in higher ed, like you said. I'm working on a program right now where we have an enormous amount of government dollars that are around this grant program. And one of the goals of this grant, and it involves 5 academic institutions around the country, is that we are not only supposed to develop an entire new set of national standards for this industry for instruction, but we're supposed to create a curriculum that will be delivered online, that will be accessible to the greater amount of the American population for either free or a very affordable price. The problem is, in the context of a grant program, as we all know, grants end. So if you build something and then there's no one left to own it, what do you expect it to ever do? And so my job is to build this program.
And this is around
Specifically orthotics and prosthetics
Okay, that's right, okay.
is the discipline in the industry here. And so my job is to build this program, design it, and then make sure that the implementation is done right so it's up there, accessible to Americans everywhere. But eventually my job ends and there's no one left to be caretakers of this. But here's the real sort of tough thing for me is that, well, even if someone finds this and you throw a bunch of marketing dollars at this and people go and do it, then what? Then what do they do with this information? And so my problem from a design perspective in education and with working with online right now is that there's still this idea that if you build it, it will come. And if you do it interactive and really cool and flashy, they will come and it will be effective and things will change and suddenly you'll have 4,000 more orthotics and prosthetics practitioners in 2018. Everybody's happy, right? And frankly, I don't know what level of design I could possibly do within the structure that I'm working where that ends that way. 2018 we have
the old information pile of the internet.
Bingo, there and forgotten, right?
So I just like kind of a closing thing. One thing I find intriguing about service design is it's one thing to ask people what they want, but it's another thing to actually have conversations with people in such a way that they begin to reveal their true needs. Because a lot of people think they know what they want. But really what they know is what is kind of annoying them or what they wish is better. And so Kristen recently organized a service design workshop with Rav Academy? Rav 7?
No, with Azul 7.
Azul 7, sorry. And it was really intriguing to me because the beginning of the service design project is to actually ask very general questions of, tell me about the last time you were trying to connect with your neighbors. And your response might be, well, I'm a working mother, and so it's very difficult for me to connect with my neighbors. There's an emotion there. Emotion equals unmet need, and that to me is what's really interesting about service design.
So it sounds like the next folks are ready to come in. So thanks, everybody.